Welcome back to the Christian Century YouTube channel. I'm John, and I'm joined today by one of our writers, Angela Hooks, who has written a brand new piece for us, The Mysticism of Thea Bowman. So we are going to be talking about some Catholic Church history, Sister Thea Bowman. Before we dive into all of that, Angela, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, John. Thank you for the invitation. It is good to be here with you. I am Angela Hooks. I am a literary writer, independent, interdisciplinary scholar. I write about life writing and diary writing. I'm also a spiritual director of Heartbeat Formation LLC, and I
Excellent.
live in Connecticut.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for joining us. Glad we can chat. Um, in this the beginning of this article, you kind of talk about how this came about. You said you were studying the history of Christian mysticism. You were seeing a lot of women, but you weren't seeing a lot of black women until you found Sister Thea. I'm curious how you made that discovery of Thea Bowman, and maybe if you could tell us a little bit more about the research you were doing at that point.
Okay. I was in my third year of seminary at Princeton Theological Seminary. So I'd already studied church history, women of the Reformation era. And I was also in my last year of training as a spiritual director. So I was in two different programs with two different institutions. And what I realized was everyone was talking about mysticism, and the lives that they were talking about, I could see in Black women who I'd studied when I did my PhD studies. I was studying diary women, diary writers, Black women diarists, who's also been excluded from the conversation. And I kept saying, this is weird. Um, why aren't we talking about this person? And why aren't we talking about that person? And what about Joanna Lee? And then I took Dr. Bowen's class on African American hermeneutics. And in that book, she began to talk about the slave narrative and how they saw God and they had visions. And I was like, oh, I think these are I think these are mystics. And with that, I asked Dr. Bowen if she would do an independent study with me. And she said yes. And it would be Black women mysticism, specifically in Christian Black women. So that's how that came about. But that wasn't my intent in seminary, right? I never thought that I would be studying mysticism.
Yeah, well, that's cool. I never thought in seminary. I ended up taking an independent study about writing, and it somewhat led to this job. So the twists and turns in seminary, we never know where they're going to lead us. Um, okay, so one of the lines that stood out to me in your piece, one of the ways you summarized Bowman's impact of her work, you said she challenged the Catholic Church to accept her as fully Black and fully Catholic. For some of our readers or listeners like me, who may be in Protestant bubbles, who might not know a lot about the Catholic tradition, could you tell us a little more about that tension that she was navigating and challenging?
Um, I can actually. And it's a tension that even Protestants hold. Gender, race, culture divide in the church. That's what drew me to Thea Bowman. We In the early research, it was 18th, 19th century women, and she was a 20th century woman who was doing this exact same thing. And I was like, look at in the Catholic Church. So she had moved out of like Baptist religion, all of the Protestant denominations, and she said, "Here I am." She was new to Catholicism, right? And here she was seeing the same thing that she had grew up in. She grew up in Mississippi. There was racism, there was division, education. Black schools were getting the least used books, right? They were getting the least of all things. And all of a sudden, here she finds herself in this space of being a Catholic nun, dealing with the same problems within the Catholic Church. You can't, as a woman, you can't preach. You know, she's in a convent and she's the only Black person. So she's dealing with all of this racism. Right? She is steeped in African culture, right? The African spirituality of songs and reading scripture. And she says, you got to take me for who I am. Like I'm full. And it's like all of us, right? We want to be known for who we are, what we bring to the table. And that was why I loved, and she challenged the institution, right? She made a way for other Black Catholics, which was, I find that to be amazing, right? There were so many other Black Catholics, and she says, this is who we are. This is what we bring to the table. And by no means, this is Thea Bowman tried to embody whiteness, right? Like she didn't try to erase who she was. It was, I'm Black, I'm beautiful, I'm Black, and I'm proud. And I believe that's what she meant by being fully Catholic.
Yeah, wow, thanks for explaining that. Um, in your article, you draw out a couple different threads from her life and ministry. One of them being this mysticism, and another this activism that she was passionate about. It made me think of, I think lately there's been an interest in the intersection of these two dynamics. There was a podcast a couple years ago, hosted in partnership with the Christian Century, Contemplating Now with Cassidy Hall, that looks just specifically at the overlap of contemplative Christianity and activism. And I wonder if you could speak to Bowman as a mystic activist in maybe either how she understood those two things relating or just your observation as you look at her life of how those two parts of her overlapped.
I like that. That's a really good question. I had to think about that a little bit because Bowman wouldn't really consider herself a mystic. Um, and in Cassidy Hall's podcast, when she were talking with all of the other scholars and practitioners, um, they made a distinction with mystic and contemplation. And what I noticed, what I observed about Thea Bowman in this mysticism is that she was always alone and she had a divine encounter with God. These are things that we know because we don't know what happened when she found out she had cancer and yet she was traveling. We don't really know how she survived tuberculosis at 15 in a sanatorium by herself. These are those mystical moments of her divine encounter. And then she lived that out knowing that she had to fight for her people, right? She'd taken this vow because to be a nun means you have to live solitary. But at the same time, she was active so much that she spoke out when she shouldn't have. How can we say it? She preached what she practiced, or she practiced what she preached. And she wasn't ashamed of it. Um, there's a quote that she says that I love. She says, I come to be with you as myself. And I don't apologize for being myself in situations where people are not comfortable with who I am. I try to be careful though, because I don't want to alienate. That's a very beautiful activist voice, right? Like I come for change. Um, there's a moment that I discovered when she first starts, and when you're being a nun, you get assignments, right? You can't go where you want to go. So she's assigned to a school that's all white, um, fifth and sixth graders. And you know what she teaches? Hymns, the spirituals. And the parents they're livid. We have this Black woman in our school, but the children loved her. That's the first intersection of activism, right? I'm going to change right here through music, and mysticism comes through music, right? I'm going to change right here what I know to be true from young lives. The children loved her, the parents loved her, and yet she knew the parents loved her only because the children loved her. But like any mystic, she saw beyond, right? Like her love was huge. It was beyond, it penetrated the walls of hate. I think that's how that intersection for her would come. And I do wonder, would she consider herself a mystic?
Yeah. Wow. Well, firstly, anyone out there, if I've committed a grievous sin by conflating contemplation and mysticism. I'm very sorry to anyone out there who's upset about that. Thank you for that very helpful answer, Angela. Um, Gosh, there's probably so much more we could talk about Sister Thea, but you've given us so much in the essay and here today to think about. So thank you for chatting. Um, Anyone out there who missed the article, you can check it out. The link will be below in the video description, along with a link to Angela's new Substack where you can read some more of her writings. Thank you so much for talking today, Angela.
Thank you, John, for inviting me. It was a pleasure.